excited to have the two of you because I think it really is necessary to understand technology, understand the pace of things, to be able to see what's coming, know what problems are going to solve themselves just by the nature of technology, and which are the ones that actually need solving. Both of you have a pretty good track record of being on the right side of that. How do you think about where we are at this moment?
I think this is one of the most exciting moments as someone who's been developing software, as you said, for quite a while now, for 20 plus years. I've been around a lot of different hype cycles, and for me, I think, like the advent of the internet, I do think there is a lot of hype right now, and it doesn't mean every individual project or individual company will be successful. But I think like the internet, when you fast forward 20 years and look back, I think the magnitude of the hype will be warranted. I think it will have the kind of impact on our personal and professional lives that it even exceeds some of the estimates right now, and it's why both of us left our jobs to work in this space. I do it for free just because I think the technology is so exciting.
You can cut his paycheck. He'll do it. So for those of you who don't know, Bret did this little word processor thing that got bought by Salesforce. You were co-CEO, I believe, when you left of Salesforce. Clay, you were at Google for a long time. You were always showing me these cool augmented reality things from cardboard on forward.
Yeah, that's a deep cut.
They're finally bringing that stuff to market. Why leave AR, VR to do AI stuff?
Well, Bret and I got together almost 2 years ago to the day. We've been friends for almost 20 years. Some, sooner as opposed to later, as it will be actually 20 years. And we compared notes and just could not stop thinking about the unbelievable things we were reading in research papers that were being released seemingly by the month and now the week. I was privileged at Google to have a front row seat on a lot of the early developments in and around large language models. And I remember one of the head exploding moments that I shared with Bret early on was we asked one of the early large language models, can you explain the 2008 financial crisis using a movie reference? And without skipping a beat, said the 2008 financial crisis was a lot like the movie Inception, except instead of dreams within dreams, it was debt within debt. I was like, what? And then DALL-E came out a few months later, right? And you had it making avocado chairs seemingly out of thin air. And so just as someone who's been obsessed with computers since I was a kid, the pace of change and the ingredients to cook with, if you will, that have all of a sudden become available are just breathtaking. And I think when there's such a technology sea change like that, the proverbial deck of cards is shuffled, and it's a great time to explore the new and set out and build something from scratch, which is what we did 2 years ago.
Well, let's dive into what you're doing. So they both run a company called Sierra. You may have heard a lot in the last 3 months about the buzzword of, AI is going to become agents. These guys were talking to me about agents long before that. Talk about what Sierra's doing, and again, one of my big concerns is this AI that makes stuff up. We're going to give it more power. So talk about not just what you're doing at Sierra, but how you're doing it.
I'll start with the what, which is really simple. So at Sierra, we help primarily consumer brands build customer-facing AI agents that don't just answer questions, but actually can take action on your behalf. So if you have ADT home security at your house and you're having a problem with your alarm, you'll now chat with the ADT AI. I think that's remarkable because the T in ADT actually stands for telegraph. So this is a company that started with a technology innovation, and we are privileged to deliver them AI for the first time. If you have SiriusXM in your car, you'll now chat with Harmony, who is their AI agent to manage your subscription. Or if you have a Sonos speaker and you're having trouble with it, you'll chat with the Sonos AI. These are all powered by Sierra. So we're really focusing on helping companies build their branded AI agent. And I think we'll get deeper on what agents are and what they aren't and what's hard and what's easy. Our view is simply put that your AI agent will become as relevant as your website or your mobile app as a digital artifact that you publish to the world to engage with your customers. And all the care and attention that you put into your website, and you have entire teams working on it, we think you'll have similarly sized teams putting that effort into a conversational AI. We both have near teenagers, and when they get added to your car insurance premium in a handful of years, you'll chat.
Ouch.
I know. And by
I'm
the
still
way,
dealing with 50. Don't bring on the kid driver.
wait until you see the cost of adding a child to your car insurance. That'll really shock you. But I think you'll actually chat with your insurance company's AI agent rather than clicking around their website to do that. So we're really, really excited about it. And how we do it, and I'll try to be short just because I think this is sort of the purpose of this discussion, is I think agent means a lot of different things. The word agent comes from the word agency. It essentially means affording this AI the opportunity to not just follow a set of rules, but make decisions, express some creativity. In the domain that we're working in, I would say it's a little simpler than a research problem. It's one of the reasons why so many of these mainstream brands have adopted our platform, because how you fix a Sonos speaker is a well-defined standard operating procedure. How you return a pair of shoes at Olokai is a well-established process. So while there is some agency afforded, it's not the same level of generalization that some research-oriented agents have. And broadly speaking, as we get in today, I think there's a lot of applications that are shovel-ready now, both in terms of brand risk, safety risk, and that's really where I think we're focusing on. There's a lot of things that I think are quite interesting, actually, that we're not focused on, but the word agent is used for all of them. So,
and for you all, we're talking, in a lot of cases, customer support, service, the kinds of things that have had call centers with humans often reading from scripts to begin with, which I suspect is part of why it's so ripe for automation. Talk about what, in addition to generative AI, is required, because we saw some early examples of when this is done wrong.
Yeah.
We saw, I believe Air Canada is still paying for some free flights because they turned a chatbot loose. Somebody in Canada's got a car for $1 because they negotiated it with their chatbot.
Yeah, I think the example you're citing was Air Canada had a seemingly generative AI-based chatbot up, and a gentleman wrote in, and I think it had a member of his family pass away, and the chatbot was apparently more empathetic and understanding than whatever their standard policy is, and said, it's a full refund, no problem. It just completely made that up, right? So that's not, in fact, their bereavement policy. And so you obviously don't want an AI that is representing your company and your brand to your customers making stuff up. And so, I think you're right to put a spotlight on this, and it's a problem area that we at Sierra have really run towards. And there's no silver bullet. And so the approach we've taken is to layer different elements within our platform. Starting with, for instance, when an agent is making access to a customer record or a flight record, that is done through deterministic APIs, right? Good old-fashioned software where the company can enforce business logic and all of those important things around it. One of the more interesting approaches we've taken is we have a saying, the solution to many problems with AI is more AI. And so we've actually introduced this notion of supervisor agents. Think of them almost as like Jiminy Cricket agents that look over the shoulder of the primary agent. Is this factual? Is this on policy? And so on. And then finally, we've developed a number of techniques. Bret mentioned these kind of standard operating procedures, or how do you do a return? How do you do a warranty? How do you help someone find a plan or a program that's better for them? Where we can express those very complex procedures in a way that acts as kind of an instruction manual for the AI, and we're able to keep it following those instructions, and yet not fall into kind of the robotic traps and conversation cul-de-sacs that I think we're all familiar with from using chatbots of yesteryear. So a layered approach.
And the business model too is, if I recall, pretty interesting, which is you basically get paid when AI can solve the problem. So it's in your guys' interest to take on problems that AI can solve, right? You get paid if a customer interaction is handled entirely through Sierra's AI and doesn't require a human. Is that?
That's right. And if you look at the history of software, these technology shifts have really changed business models as well. We used to go to Fry's Electronics, buy a box of software. Fry's was one of my favorite places in Palo Alto, by the way. I say that with great affection.
R.I.P. Fry's.
I know. I used to build all my computers with parts from Fry's. And then, the birth of the cloud happened, and we got software as a service, where not only did we subscribe to software, but we came to expect the updates from software, which sort of changed our relationship as customers of software and vendors of software. Our view of AI is that it actually can complete a job. So why not pay for those outcomes rather than pay for the privilege of using software? And at Sierra, we think you should not pay for software, you should pay for a job well done. And that's why how we're charging for Sierra.
And you all have found a sweet spot, again, a set of tasks that the AI seems relatively ready to handle, especially when you combine hard-coded logic with the generative and have a supervision system, have some hard-coded limits. When you hear the talk industry-wide, now agents has become the buzzword. Everyone's doing agents.
It happened very quickly.
It did.
It's like, it went from no one was talking about to literally every company.
We were actually worried when we announced the company that anyone would understand what we're talking about.
Congratulations. That's not the problem. But everyone and their mother is doing an agent. My mom's here in the front. I don't think she's doing an AI agent.
Mrs. Freed, yeah.
But there's a lot of talk. And am I right in thinking that while AI may be ready to have agency in some domains, am I also right in being worried that the same technology that's still making things up as a chatbot isn't ready to be given broad agency?
I think there are two parts to that. One is, in what domain are you using an agent? So just between the three of us, the set of things we might want a personal agent, one type of agent, to do is enormous, right? It's just an incredibly vast surface area, from booking travel to appointments to making decisions about where you're going to go to school or what class you're going to take. So huge domain. And so I think in broad open-ended domains, it's challenging because how do you ensure, right, that the agent will stay on task, do the right thing across that vast surface area? Broadly, we think of there being three types of agents. Personal agents, which will emerge over the next several years from the likes of Google and Meta and so on. Second are role-based agents, so agents like Cursor or a Copilot, a flavor of it, where you're asking the agent to do a specific job, I think are more well-suited to the technology.
Or Harvey in the legal profession, where
that's right.
The job of, say, a paralegal.
That's right. And then we think the third category, these branded customer-facing agents that really expose the functionality and capability of a company, which is much more limited. So I think the narrower the surface area, I think the more conducive that is to agents today.
And broadly, by the way, and sorry for interrupting, Clay, but this is why I'm actually really excited about sort of the applied AI space, because I think as a research problem, to build an agent that can do anything and not have the downsides that you're alluding to continues to be a research problem. It's an important research problem, but it's not solved, and I think there's a lot of risk. In contrast, if you're, say, a company like Cursor, we're a customer of that company that's making a coding agent, that's a much more narrow domain. And there's a lot of research and development there, but there's also a lot of engineering, and I think when you narrow the domain and you can really understand what the guardrails are necessary to actually have something be successful. So in marketing, in legal, in software engineering, in customer experience, and customer service, these are the types of areas that have some really, I think, exciting companies emerging because they're taking this very general problem, which is an important research problem, say, hey, we're going to engineer a solution for this domain. And I think a lot of those applications are ready now, and we use them almost all at our company.
So I think you all wisely decided you wanted to be in the applied side of the space and not competing with the many companies that are trying to build the underlying technology, although, as we'll get into in a minute or two, you are the chair of OpenAI, which is one of those companies. How do you see that frontier evolving? Right now, you've built it so that you can use multiple models, Sierra, right? Some your own, some from others. Do you think we have, a couple of years from now, do you think we have still Google, Amazon, Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI, Microsoft, all sort of, it seems like they're getting similar results?
My view is that the AI market will rhyme with the cloud market a little bit in how it plays out, where there will be a very small handful of companies building frontier models and doing the pre-training process and the capital expenditures required for building these very large models. And that will sort of rhyme with the cloud infrastructure market, Azure, GCP, Amazon Web Services. Then there'll be a whole lot of companies building tools for people who are building AI applications or AI solutions like Snowflake and Databricks, or AI native companies like Scale and others. And then there will be a very large number of applications companies like software as a service that are not necessarily AI companies, though they are in some ways, depending on the lens you look at it through, but they're actually just solving a problem. They just happen to be using AI to do that. And if you look at the cloud market, I actually don't know the math of how much spend is at the software as a service level versus the infrastructure as a service level, but taxes are collected all the way down, right? Most of the software as a service companies run in the cloud as well. And the reason I think it'll play out that way is I do think the CapEx required to build these large foundation and frontier models is such that it really only makes sense for these research labs in affiliation with folks like Microsoft and Amazon Web Services can really do that in a sane financial structure. And I do think that if you talk to any mainstream company, they don't want to buy technology, they want to buy solutions to their problems. And I think that's why software as a service existed. And I think that's why there's so much excitement around agents, is I think that's actually a form factor that is a really great way to consume this technology if you're not a tech company and you're not trying to build things from scratch.
And Clay, what's next for you all? So you have these early customers where you're doing the customer service work. Talk about, I imagine usually when you talk to a startup, you're hearing the beginning of their vision, not the full thing. What are some things that you imagine Sierra might be able to do, and what technology do you need to mature to do that?
There are a couple dimensions to it. One is just the breadth of the customer experience that Sierra can aid our customers and their customers with. And so we began fairly narrowly with customer service, customer support. What was exciting and surprising to us was just how quickly our customers pulled us into things adjacent and even afar from that. And so, for instance, the Olokai agent, Olokai makes kind of Hawaiian Island-inspired footwear and apparel, can advise on products. I'm going to a wedding and I need a pair of loafers that would work on the beach. What should I get? And you can just ask that, right, in natural language. It can even advise on where you might want to visit, right, on the islands. And so product recommendations and things around that. Sonos is a really interesting case where we're helping not just with troubleshooting, but actually helping you get your system up and running. And so more complexity and nuance in helping you get the most out of your product. And I'm excited to span the whole journey from setup and sign up and getting you activated and successful on a product or service, all the way to, if something's not working for you, helping a plan that's right and better for you, which is something we're doing with several of our subscriptions businesses. The other dimension is modality. So we started with chat. In October, we announced and launched voice support. And in B2C businesses, roughly 80% of all customer contacts happen with voice, right? You want to talk to someone. It's so ergonomic. It's so easy if you can get a hold of someone. And so voice, we think, is going to be a really, really big deal for our customers. And one interesting thing is, like, gosh, if the cost of a phone call goes down by an order of magnitude,
Or 2 orders of magnitude.
or 2 orders of magnitude, do you have 10 times as many phone calls with your customers? It's bizarre to us that today there are websites devoted to helping you track down the hidden 800 numbers, right? So that you can actually talk to a company that you do business with. Your customers want to speak to you. We're excited about helping the great companies of the world have more conversations with their customers.
So I mentioned in my intro that we've had some scheduling changes. One of those is Sarah Fryer, the CFO of OpenAI, was supposed to be here. She was unfortunately unavailable. Then Jason Kwan was supposed to be here, the Chief Strategy Officer. He got sick. So we won't have someone specifically from the company, but fortunately, we already happen to have Bret Taylor on stage.
You'll have to settle for me.
He's the chairman of the board of OpenAI. So I did want to take some time. Clay, you can relax a bit while I grill. But feel free to help me.
I'm actually going to defer most questions to him.
Excellent.
Yeah.
First of all, it's, you came onto the board a year ago. There was, I believe, some stuff. Somebody got fired, somebody got hired. Anyway.
I read about it, yeah.
Talk about, because you've now, for those who don't know, in addition to his very impressive career as a tech executive, Bret has also more recently become known as, like, if you want to be on an interesting board, it's anyone that he's on. Your last one was Twitter. So you have some experience in this. What was it like joining the board? What are some of your early impressions? What did you know, and what have you learned?
It was a very unusual experience for everyone involved. So, from my vantage point, which was only one of the vantage points in it, Sam was fired. There was sort of a letter from many employees in the company saying that they were going to leave, and I was brought in to sort of mediate a resolution to that between the outgoing board and the management team in the company. Clay was my second phone call after my wife when I got that call from the board and Sam, and I basically having the conversation is, hey, I think I'm in a very unique position to be able to help here, but the cost to Sierra wouldn't be zero. Should we do it? And one of the interesting outcomes of that conversation was just how much the existence of OpenAI was so meaningful to us personally, and even to the existence of Sierra. I think many people in this room are probably here in large part because of ChatGPT, indirectly or directly, just its influence on the world. And I just couldn't imagine that organization disappearing. It just was so meaningful to the history of software as we know it, and such a unique sort of a quirk of history that this research lab has come to define the future of technology as it has. And so I joined in part because I did feel like I was in a unique position to help, and I'm really happy I did. What have I learned? One is, it's a nonprofit research lab, so it's very mission driven, and I think a lot of companies say they're mission driven. I've never been at a place that is so singularly focused on a mission to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits humanity. And then similarly, I've never been on a board where you'll have researchers talking about advanced research for more than half the time. And this is the organization. So it's been a fascinating experience for me. And as I said, for me personally, I'm just grateful that it exists, and it's been fun to see the 12 days of shipmess going on right now, and to see kind of a revitalization. To all the
reporters, we don't like the idea of 12 days of news. But anyway, we like a little news. Yeah. 12 days might be a bit much. So one of the things that's interesting is it's not your typical board. No, lots of the boards you've been on aren't your typical board, but this one in particular, it's a nonprofit board. How do you think about your responsibility? Because it's not just about creating value for shareholders. How do you think of, who are you responsible to, and what are you responsible for?
Well, it's not just about that, it's not at all about that, actually. So, we're a nonprofit, and what that means is our fiduciary duty is actually to the mission, not to shareholders. And so the mission of OpenAI is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits humanity. And that's complicated because shareholders are well-identified people who you can talk to, and a mission, on the other hand, is something that can be interpreted. And I think that's in part why mission-driven organizations, not just OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, they take different corporate structures, but I would say they're all very mission-driven places. What that mission means is something of an ink blot test to the person reading it. When I say ensure AGI benefits humanity, some of you might go immediately to safety, which is a very reasonable perspective. Some other people might go towards the digital divide and job displacement, which is another very reasonable perspective. And it's kind of all of those things. And so the board is we consider ourselves sort of stewards of that mission, and ensuring that all the actions we take, all the investments we make are all steering the world towards AGI that benefits humanity. So it's very interesting, it's very heady. It's just a different level of societal obligation than you'd have in a typical company.
So one of the things that the board's been pretty clear is going on, when Sam returned, I had a phone call with, I think it was Sam and Mira that night, that Sam came back to the board, that they were going to look at the corporate structure, among other things. One of the issues is, it is currently a nonprofit. In the last investment round, the investors were basically promised that if we don't convert to more of a for-profit structure within 2 years, we can ask for our money back. They might not want it, but they have that option. The company said it's exploring that. How do you think of it? To me, I'm thinking, well, it's kind of like a sale almost, in that, if the nonprofit is going to give up ownership of this really valuable entity, it probably needs to be compensated the way somebody would if they were selling an asset. Is that the right way to think about it? Or how do you think about managing your fiduciary duties to the nonprofit while helping in this restructuring?
Yeah, it's directionally the right way to think about it. And just to clear up, I think, some misconceptions. First, we haven't figured it all out yet, so I can't speak to all the specifics, in part just because we don't know all the details of how it will end up. I'll start with why are we even thinking about it in the first place? One is to build AGI that benefits all of humanity. It requires billions of dollars in OpEx and CapEx to do that. And that's not a type of thing a traditional nonprofit can raise. It really requires a different corporate structure. And that's something that sort of preceded my joining the board, but just, I think when the organization started, it wasn't obvious the level of infrastructure investment necessary to invest in AI. And so as we think about the mission, we want to set up a corporate structure that enables the company to achieve its mission. So that's how we're starting with all the discussions that we're having. And the second thing, there's been some reports where sort of the nonprofit is turning into a for-profit. That's also not true. Right now, there's a nonprofit and a for-profit in one corporate structure, and we're thinking about how to reconfigure that. And we're trying to set up the nonprofit to actually be more sustainable and extremely well-financed. So all the issues that you sort of alluded to.
And it could own a stake in something for
it absolutely could, and that's the way we're thinking about it. And we are solely fiduciaries of the nonprofit, so that's the lens that there's lots of stakeholders in this, investors, employees. My job as chairman of the board is to focus on the not-for-profit. So I'm excited about it. I think there's actually a way to set this up, which sets the nonprofit up to be more sustainable, extremely well-financed, and actually, as we think about, I mentioned that mission is such a wide surface area. Can we actually address more of it in a different corporate structure? And I actually am quite optimistic that we can. So a lot to figure out, and I can't be more specific just because I want to make sure that we sort of have the space to figure out those details. But we want to set up the not-for-profit to be successful. The most important thing is the mission and ensuring that we're setting up this organization to achieve it in all of its facets.
And you mentioned the mission and that a lot of people at the company are mission-driven. We've also seen a lot of people in the last year leave saying that they're less convinced about the mission, less convicted that it's going to be safe. We've seen a lot of people, disproportionately women, leave. A lot of significant departures over the last year. How do you approach that as a board member? I mean, it's got to be concerning, right?
Anytime someone, and some people have left, are some of the best researchers in the world, so of course I care. I try to, wherever possible, have conversations with them individually to hear them out. And I think if you zoom out a lot, 3 years ago, OpenAI was a research lab that you knew, but probably many people outside of this room did not, right? And it's gone from a small research lab to, one could argue, the most important technology organization in the world in a very, very short period of time. And you've been covering startups for most of your career as a reporter.
Since you were starting them.
Since I was starting them. And a very fast-growing company it's challenging. You end up scaling people, processes, impact, and it naturally leads to both incredible impact and some chaos. And you've seen it in some of the great companies have had it. So, we're not without our flaws, but I think broadly what's been very inspiring to me is seeing the impact of the alumni of OpenAI, which I personally am very proud of, but also just seeing the continued momentum of OpenAI. You joked about being exhausted by the 12 days of shipments. I think it's really neat that OpenAI just continues to be at the frontier of what defines our expectations about what AI can do. And I'm just so incredibly proud of the OpenAI team for their continued execution on the mission. But one thing just to state it though is, when someone disagrees with our interpretation of the mission, I try to listen. I think the worst thing I could do in my role is have sort of an ossified view of what our mission is, or even a defensiveness that we're doing it the right way. We might not be, and I actually think one of my main obligations is to listen. And so I don't always agree, but I actually think that as stewards of a mission that is so ambitious, I always try to deeply listen. And so I think being self-critical is extremely important when the impact of your technology is so large. And actually I would say a lot of the leadership team, I've seen that value in them as well.
Well, I would love to keep talking with these two. These are two of my favorite people to talk to about AI, but I've been getting this sign flashing for a few minutes that says wrap up. So I am going to do that, but I look forward to hearing what Sierra's up to next, and certainly whatever drama comes forth, or products, or both, from OpenAI. And thank you both very much.
You're welcome, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thanks so much.